Welcome to DCJ's podcast. The Division of Criminal Justice is within the Colorado Department of Public Safety. This podcast is dedicated to sharing the stories, insights, and experiences of those who work tirelessly behind the scenes to improve public safety, policy, support crime victims, and build stronger, more resilient communities. We'll dive into the challenges and triumphs that come with building a safer future for all who call Colorado home. Thank you for tuning in. We're thrilled to have you join. I'm Matt Lund, Director of the Colorado Division of Criminal Justice. This episode, we dive into the vital work of our Victims Programs team. Our three incredible guests include Kelly Kissel, our Victim Programs Manager, Kim Brannon, who works with Victim Services, and Cameron Reesner, who focuses on combating human trafficking through education. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you, Matt.
Thanks for having us.
I'm looking forward to the conversation. Kelly, we'll start with you as the manager of the team. Can you give our listeners an overview of the Victims Programs team? What's your core mission, and how do you all support victims in the state of Colorado?
Thanks, Matt. The Victims Program serves as a trusted resource for crime victims and survivors, service providers, and agencies, and a catalyst for improving the delivery of and access to services for victims and survivors in Colorado. We manage the distribution of federal and state grants to various agencies across the state, ensuring they have the funding to provide direct services. We also support victims of sexual assault through our SAVE program, which helps to cover the costs of medical forensic exams for victims that choose initially to not report the crime to law enforcement, but they still need medical care. The OVP staff provide a variety of technical assistance to victim service agencies that are working directly with victims, including agencies with responsibilities under the Victims' Rights Act that Kim will tell you about more shortly. Our goal is to empower these agencies to provide the best possible support to people during some of the most difficult times in their lives.
That's definitely a huge responsibility, Kelly. Can you talk a little bit about the funding landscape? How are victim services funded in Colorado, both with state and federal dollars?
Here in Colorado, our victims are funded through a number of different resources. We have several federal grants that support victims and survivors through their recovery, and we also have a little bit of state money that helps to support those services.
And one of the questions I get a lot when I'm going around the state of Colorado is questions related to Prop KK. And so what does that, I know there's a lawsuit right now that might impact the availability of those funds in the near term, but can you talk broadly about kind of the arc of those dollars when they start coming in, when we might be able to make some decisions on getting those dollars out the door, and when can local organizations, local nonprofits, governments have some expectation of being able to spend down those dollars?
Sure. The initial initiative around Prop KK started in the legislature and then was on the ballot last November. So the collections for those funds, which are excise tax on the sale of guns and ammunition within Colorado, started the collection in April of this year. So we are just starting to see that money come in, and we anticipate and hope that we will receive up to $30 million out of those funds, but we know that will take some time. And because of that, the first time that we'll probably be able to resource out those dollars to direct service agencies will be in our calendar year 27 funding cycle, which will start in January of 2027.
I appreciate that, Kelly. And, in addition to the grant funding, obviously that's important, and feel free to expand on that if you'd like, but what are some of the biggest benefits your team creates, and how are those impacts seen in communities all across Colorado?
Yeah, I think our biggest impact is often ensuring a consistent level of service across the state, especially in rural or underserved areas. We work hard to create a network of support that reaches every corner of the state, so no matter where a victim or survivor is, they can find help. A couple examples are a victim of a sexual assault in Gunnison will have advocates and access to a forensic nurse that can support them while they are seeking medical care, as well as providing them information about their reporting options so they can make an informed decision about whether the crime will be reported. In Grand Junction, Colorado, a child victim of abuse will have a supportive environment to speak with trained professionals who can provide them with resources and behavioral health support after the incident. And in another example, in Colorado Springs, grant funding supported the response to the Club Q shooting, which allowed for an amazing resource center to be established there called PRISM. And PRISM provides a safe spot for for survivors to gather and seek mental health support and other services as part of their ongoing recovery from the shooting. But always our main goal is about staying flexible and responsive to the evolving needs of victims as new issues and crimes emerge, which is something our whole team, and especially Kim, our Victims' Rights Act specialist, focuses on.
So that's a great transition to you, Kim. Can you tell us a little bit about your role at DCJ as the Victim Rights Specialist?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me. So as the role of the VRA specialist, I handle all of our Victim Rights Act complaints that we get across the state. So I work with the victim on completing the packets to submit the Victim Rights Act complaint and then help them through the process by updating them. Then I also work with the criminal justice agency that the allegations are against to help collect information for them. With that, I get all the information from the victim as well as the agency and provide it to our Victim Rights Act subcommittee, who are the subcommittee that reviews the complaints to determine if there's a violation or not. So my role in this is really to be a neutral party to assist the victim as well as the agency that is in question for the violation. The other part of my job is I provide training across the state on the Victim Rights Act. So to all of our criminal justice agencies that have responsibilities under the VRA, with the addition to a lot of our nonprofit agencies as well, to ensure that they are providing information out to victims as to what their rights are, and to connect them back to me if they do feel that there is a violation or any concerns regarding their case. I also provide technical assistance to our criminal justice agencies that have responsibilities under the VRA. So if there's any questions around how to work with the victim, if the victims fall underneath the Victim Rights Act, and how we can assist them through that process to prevent them from getting any future violations, our office will also provide technical assistance to them.
That's great. And so, and you touched on this, when there are agencies that might not be in compliance or there's opportunities for improvement, it sounds like it's a pretty collaborative process to both assist the agency and ensure that rights of victims in the state of Colorado are upheld.
Yeah, absolutely. So our VRA subcommittee has about 7 members on it. We have district attorney staff, we have a judge, we have a community member, a victim of a crime who actually filed a VRA complaint many years ago, and now she sits on the subcommittee. So it's great to have her perspective as a victim on there. And they're the ones who make those decisions. If there is a violation, if they determine that the agency absolutely did violate the victim's rights, what they may look at doing is something based on system change. Our goal is to make sure that this doesn't happen to another victim in the future. So we could look at doing training for their department. We can look at doing policy change, that would be around what that violation was. We also help to facilitate conversations between victims and that agency themselves. So if it's something where the victim has requested to meet with the elected DA, we would try to coordinate that conversation, or with the sheriff or a police chief.
That's great information. I appreciate that. And one of the things, and you touched on it in your response when you talked about who sits on this particular board, but one of the things that we really focus on for a while now in the division is making sure we have people with lived experience on all of our boards and commissions. And so I really appreciate you highlighting that in your response. For folks who may not know, what are some of the rights of victims of crime? And kind of a follow-up to that, how does that compare to what occurs in other states? How does Colorado's system and victim rights in Colorado maybe compare more broadly across the country?
Yeah, so some of the rights that victims have underneath the VRA is to be provided with resources and information, services on their case, being updated on the investigation of the case by law enforcement and what the next steps are in it. So if it's going to the district attorney's office next, then the district attorney's office will take over and they're going to update them on court hearings, so dates, times, assist them through the court process, and then consulting with them regarding the plea, or if they're going to dismiss the case, having that conversation with them ahead of time, and then doing a handoff to that agency as to where they were sentenced to. So if it's probation, handing them off to probation, community corrections, the Department of Corrections. So at that point, then we've got another agency that's going to come involved with the victim's life. And then those agencies would update the victim on that status. So up until they successfully complete the program, or where they end up, they would contact the victim and keep them updated throughout the case. As far as other states, I always like to brag that Colorado has one of our leading VRA, and we do have a lot of states that look to Colorado when they are changing their legislation to ask us how we were able to get bills passed and different rights afforded to victims, how we were able to do that. There's probably an average about 38 states that have a compliance process, and Colorado, like I said, is one of the better ones. We're always working with those states. So if they are trying to get a compliance process in their state, they often look to Colorado to see how, again, we were able to get laws passed so they can have that within their own state.
So when we talk about the VRA, can you kind of give a brief overview of what crimes are covered?
Yeah, not all crimes are covered underneath the VRA. So I always like to say that it's your person's crimes. So there's a lot of times you're not going to see harassment. You're not going to see auto theft. You're not going to see identity theft or your cyber crimes. So the majority of the crimes that we're working with is domestic violence, sexual assaults, homicides, robberies, menacings. So most of the time it's all your person crimes.
If somebody is a victim of a crime that doesn't fall under the VRA, what are some of the things that either community nonprofits or law enforcement agencies, district attorneys' offices, what are they doing to still support victims in this space?
Yeah, so if there is a victim that does not fall underneath the VRA, we encourage those agencies to continue to provide those resources and services to the victim. It would be on a courtesy basis. So they'd be providing them that information with that understanding that we're giving you this, we're providing this, but it's as a courtesy. So unfortunately, if that victim felt that they didn't get updated on a court date or something like that, the victim would not be able to go back and file a VRA complaint against them, because unfortunately it just wouldn't be under the purview of the VRA, with it not being one of our crimes. But we do encourage all of the agencies, no matter where they're at, to still provide the same services to those victims with the resources, the updates on the case, so victims can request that. And hopefully our agencies are doing that.
One of the crimes that unfortunately occurs in our community and communities across the country involves various forms of human trafficking. And so I'm really excited to have Cameron here because I think the work that she and the rest of the folks in our human trafficking group work on is so vital for Colorado. Cameron, can you help us understand what human trafficking is and why education is such a key part of combating it?
I can try. Thanks for having me. So when it comes to what is human trafficking, a very short and sweet version of it is that human trafficking is the exploitation of someone for either their labor or their services through the use of coercion, force, fraud. So those are kind of the three key things that people think of when they're thinking about it. So when I say things around coercion, you can think about different types of abuse like emotional, mental, financial abuse. If we're talking about our force, that's going to look more like our physical abuse. And then if we're talking about fraud, that's going to be kind of a trickery situation. So as a criminal justice practice, both in Colorado and nationally, human trafficking is separated in the law into labor trafficking and sex trafficking, but it's kind of a fake separations because a lot of times people are actually experiencing both. It's also super important for me to just mention that in cases where somebody is younger than the age of 18 and they are induced to perform a commercial sex act, it's seen in the criminal justice system automatically as human trafficking, even if there's no coercion, force, or fraud. That's because we look at individuals under the age of 18 and we say, wow, you really shouldn't have to be engaged in this kind of thing. Commercial sex acts can really be a broad version of sex acts for anything of value. So it doesn't have to be a money exchange. It can look like things like housing, food, cell phones, drugs, anything you can generally use money to access is going to kind of be fair game there. So when we talk about human trafficking, when I gave you that definition, right, that human trafficking is the abuse or tricking of someone into their services or labor, that's a pretty wide range of experiences. So that's where education really comes in and is super useful. So when people usually hear about human trafficking, they are hearing about it in relation to situations of smuggling or kidnapping and abductions or even sex work, possibly, but that's really only a handful of realities that people are really living in. So that means that our helpers, our first responders, they're only seeing and noticing a handful of situations, and they might be writing other things off as something else. It also means that the people who are experiencing human trafficking might know that something's wrong, but they don't have the language to say, I'm being trafficked, which would usually strike somebody and say, oh, I want to help this person. I want to assist them. I want to make sure that they have my attention. So the person might be describing some sort of abuse or trickery related to work that they're doing. And often that helper is kind of missing the bigger picture, thinking, oh, I don't work in XYZ. I don't work in things like job readiness or food access or housing, so I can't really help this person. But there are resources all over Colorado, and when we know that it's a human trafficking situation, we fortunately have the Colorado Human Trafficking Hotline here, and they can help you connect with service providers who might be able to connect that person and kind of close those gaps. So when somebody gets educated on the wide breadth of human trafficking experiences in Colorado and recognizes what they're seeing it, they can call that hotline, they connect with service providers, they can help those people with needs and what that person is describing. So we have a website called thisishumantrafficking.com for anybody to learn more. It also gives you the state hotline number, because we know that nobody can address human trafficking alone. We all really have to lean in and connect with one another if we're going to make any meaningful impact.
Well, that's wonderful information, Cameron. I think oftentimes people have a certain visual of what they think human trafficking looks like, but they don't understand the full breadth of human trafficking and the reality of what human trafficking looks like all across the country. You know, you touched on law enforcement interaction with individuals that might be being trafficked. And you touched on the importance of education. I know there's a new mandatory human trafficking training course for law enforcement here in Colorado. Can you tell us about that initiative and why it's such a significant step forward for the state?
Yeah, so this state is wonderful in its local control, right? We create solutions that are meaningful to our communities by having that local control. What it also means is that oftentimes we don't get the opportunity to focus on things that could be helpful for everyone to know. So before July of this year, human trafficking was considered an elective course that academies could but weren't required to offer. So starting in 2016, so for the last 9 years, our DCJ staff worked alongside partners, including members of the Colorado Human Trafficking Council, which includes a lot of law enforcement. We also have partners outside of that council to open up and kind of maintain communication with Post in efforts to collaborate and not duplicate work in service to those Colorado law enforcement officers. So discussion in 2024 led to Post's adoption of the learning objectives specifically from the Colorado Human Trafficking Council's Human Trafficking Investigations Training, with the training itself listed as a recommended resource, something that was offered and was supposed to really support the work that academies might need, because creating a training on a topic that you may not be well versed in is just tough stuff. So we wanted to make sure that they have that opportunity there. So the Human Trafficking Investigations Training is that recommended resource. It includes both labor and sex trafficking expertise. It's designed to be victim-centered. It's evidence-based. Practices really are the core tenets of everything we're doing there. So the human trafficking team at DCJ had recently converted that training, not only from a live in-person version, but also there's an online self-paced training. That happened in 2023, about mid-year, allowing that flexibility for compliance with the mandate, but also making sure that, you know, if you've got an academy or you've got a sheriff's office that has 3 people in it, right? There's very few people coming through. They don't have time to sit in a space together. They don't have time to make that work, or there might be, you know, there's nobody in the area that can train them on the topic, or whatever the case may be. It's just something that allows them to have that flexibility and really be accommodating to their realities. We also have a train the trainer, where academy instructors who might want to use this specific training as a way of fulfilling those learning objectives, they can go to this train the trainer. Those academy instructors can then be certified to train that human trafficking investigations to cadets in person.
Well, I know the training course that you talked about, Cameron, is going to make a significant impact in Colorado. It's something that I'm really proud of that you all have been working on.
So we're seeing an impact of this training. This training has been around for almost 10 years now. For example, I've gone and done trainings with sheriff's office that have those 3 to 5 people that are working, and they have been working domestic violence cases. They've been working sexual assault cases. They've been working on car boosting or drug dealing, and we do a training with them. And in one instance with a sheriff's office, they opened 5 human trafficking investigations within a week because they had been seeing it. They just didn't realize what they were seeing before. We also had with our Colorado State Patrol dispatchers, one of them completed the course as an elective and was able to recognize the potential trafficking indicators during a kind of routine traffic stop that had been called in. They then talked to the person who was on site, the trooper that was on site. And what that crucial observation did was it actually led the trooper to stop and really think about, actually, I already thought there was something maybe a little odd here. He ended up doing a more thorough investigation, showing that this training can really turn a seemingly normal interaction into an opportunity to help a victim and kind of disrupt those types of situations.
Yeah, that's a really powerful story, Cameron, related to the dispatch, right? I often think some of these low frequency events are particularly difficult for law enforcement because, to your point, they don't necessarily see it all the time, or they don't necessarily know to look for certain clues. And so my hope is that this training, and I believe it will have a significant impact across the state in helping people better identify and provide services for folks that may be a victim of human trafficking. Can you talk maybe a little bit about misconceptions in human trafficking that the community should know about?
There's a lot of them. So first and foremost is just the different crimes that it gets confused with, right? So there's specifically smuggling and kidnapping or abduction. Those are two things that often when people are talking about human trafficking, they're actually referring to those other two crimes. And while they can happen, they can overlap, they're separate entities, they're separate occurrences. And so what we're seeing is, like, especially specifically with kidnapping, the rates of kidnapping and human trafficking overlapping is really only a 3% rate at a national level. We're seeing here in Colorado that the service providers are seeing about the same trends there. It doesn't usually go to court cases because of other things, right? They're pressing charges on kidnapping rather than on human trafficking. But when we're thinking about human trafficking, it's really about those forms of abuse. And it's, you'll notice in that definition of exploitation for somebody's work through coercion, force, or fraud, it mentions nothing about movement. It mentions nothing about abduction. It only says that we have to kind of abuse someone for their labor of some kind. And so that's kind of the first and foremost one. Of course, that's not going to make, your blockbusters come in and things like that. That's not what's going to make money. It's going to need to be a little bit more salacious than that, a little bit more sensationalized. We also see that there's a lot of misconceptions that victims are kind of these pure of heart, have never done anything wrong in their lives kind of humans, when in reality, we know that a lot of people are in really tough situations, have made really hard decisions. And oftentimes that's how they end up in these kinds of really extra rough situations and extra rough opportunities. And so just because they've agreed or made decisions maybe to be in an intimate partnership with someone doesn't necessarily mean that they deserve to be human trafficked. Same thing with domestic violence, right? Just because you made some decisions and you have some level of autonomy doesn't mean that you deserve the abuse that you're being handed.
Well, that's important to highlight. I appreciate that, Cameron. And then one final question: how has the change in kind of technology and availability of technology changed kind of the human trafficking space?
That's a great question. So when it comes to technology, I think there's a couple shifts that have been happening there as well, right? We've got this immediacy, this need to be in contact at all times, need to be available at all times. But there's also this lack of connection and lack of meaningful discernment of what's going on and what that relationship might feel like. So there's almost this like hollowing that's happening. It also means that people are potentially looking for connections where otherwise they wouldn't have, right? They might have previously made connections at a coffee shop and now they're making those connections online. It's a little harder for us to discern whether or not somebody means us harm when we are lacking a lot of those interactions and a lot of those kind of day-to-day tells. We also have that when people are looking for maybe situations, gigs online specifically, those gigs are oftentimes posted and right, they used to be on bulletin boards and in a space where you can kind of go see it at the coffee shop. You can, see who's posting the thing. You can see a little bit more about the situation. versus now what we're seeing is that when it's online, there's just this rapid fire aspect of it, but there's also this lack of transparency that comes with it, right? If somebody's posting online and they've got an awesome picture of like travel the world, get paid a ton, also let's have a party mentality, that's going to appeal to a lot of people because they're like in their young 20s or their mid 20s and they're really looking for that kind of opportunity. It's going to be harder for them to know the tells that this might be a situation that's tricking them into, now they are being moved around. Well, what happens when we're moved around? We lose access to the support systems that we have, and it might just be something that they get caught up a little quicker just because we have that immediacy factor as well.
As a parent of two small kids, I think a lot about technology literacy and being able to spot things that, to your point, might be too good to be true. And in using that as an opportunity for education. And I think it's important for all of us. Well, thank you all again for this powerful conversation. From Kelly's leadership in building this entire framework of support to Kim's work on the ground, ensuring that victims receive the compassionate, victim-centered services they need, and the great work that you're doing in human trafficking, Cameron, and increasing education around our state. It's all really vital and important. It all ties back to the idea that we are a team dedicated to supporting healing in our communities so that everyone who calls Colorado home can thrive. Thank you for listening. We are just getting started, and we look forward to bringing you more stories, interviews, and discussions that highlight the incredible work being done in our communities to build a stronger, safer Colorado. If you enjoyed today's episode, help us increase awareness by sharing and subscribing to this podcast. Together, we can continue to drive change and create a brighter future for everyone. Until next time, stay safe and stay engaged.